Oh, Jesse, is there fudge product placement in your shows?
There has been in the past, actually. Our first year, so one of the fudge shops, so some of the fudge shops are like local Michigan chains, but Kilwins, which is national, started in Michigan, but there is a Kilwins on the island, and they've been a sponsor for us for several years. And so when we did Much Ado, our first year, when we were setting things up to have the party and all of that, we came out with a bunch of fudge boxes and merch from Kilwins. So we certainly have done it in the past. We've talked about it a couple other times, but maybe we'll do it again this year. We'll see.
I know that if I were an actor in one of your shows, I would be so tempted to start every scene with fudge in my hands.
We have had like little mini photo shoots at some fudge shops, and we've had the actors certainly enjoy getting to be in a place where it is so widely accessible, and because they're recognizable, they oftentimes end up getting things at a bit of a discount, which is a fun little treat.
And starting a scene with a handful of fudge is a little rough to keep it in your hand the entire scene, Jim. It's not exactly a heavy use kind of item.
And now you know why I'm not an actor anymore. All right, we still got some people coming in. Hey, Tim, I'm glad you could make it. Kim Carroll, woohoo! For those of you that live in these meetings online more than you would like, do you have any standards for, we never begin these on time. We begin X number of minutes after time to allow for folks to come in. Are there standards that y'all have with regard to that?
My company says they have a 1 minute standard, but it's actually about a 4.5 minute standard. So
we have a standard that we awkwardly discuss the weather for 2 or 3 minutes while people gather and then get on with things.
How's the weather by you, Paul?
Oh, it's really nice, actually. Thank you for asking. Without question, I would say it's sunny here.
Keep going. Drag it out. We got to fill. Vamp till ready. I think we probably get rolling, Jim. Are we missing anybody that we were expecting on the presentation side?
No, we've got all those folks. And for those of you that have been in other ones of these, this one's going to go a little bit differently, he says, thinking that he can control anything. We're going to start with our three panelists introducing themselves. I would love for each of the three of you to give us brief professional bios, hitting whatever points that you would like our audience to know. And the two things that I would love for you to include are the timeline when you got involved in the Mary Baldwin University Shakespeare and Performance program, or whatever it was called when you got involved. And the second thing is, where does your professional biography intersect with Jim Warren, since it's on the playground with Jim Warren, and I'm going to try to make this as much about me as I can. So, and because you said, wow, Paul gets to go first.
Well, I'm saying wow because my professional biography intersected with that of Jim Warren in the Paleolithic era, I believe. Jim, I saw your daughter on campus yesterday, and every time I see her, I'm able to sort of say, like, I was there when your parents met. So that goes way back. I'll start with my professional bio and come back to Jim to make it all about him. I'm Paul Menzer. I'm the provost at Mary Baldwin University and a professor of Shakespeare and Performance. I've been at Mary Baldwin 17 or 18 years now, and I came to Mary Baldwin in 2007 to be the director of the MBU Shakespeare and, at that point, Renaissance Literature and Performance program in cooperation with the American Shakespeare Center. And so I was the director of the Shakespeare and Performance graduate program for, I think, about 12 or 15 years-ish, and then transitioned into some other administrative roles. And my colleagues here, Matt and Doreen, took over and proved how derelict I had been in responsibilities as director, since they've done a much better job. But I still teach in the Shakespeare Performance Program actively, if not accurately, but certainly actively. And I'm a longtime writer about performance studies and performance history and theater history and textual matters, and most recently a biographer of Shakespeare. And my professional trajectory that overlapped with Jim is when I came to work for the Shenandoah Shakespeare Express in 1993 as the advancement director or director of development. And so I got to work with American Shakespeare Center, nay, the Shenandoah Shakespeare Express from the early years. And I'll wind it up by saying that I was the person who took the phone call from Joe Harmon, who called us in Harrisonburg to suggest that, long story short, that Shenandoah Shakespeare come to Stanton and build a theater there. And that's how it all started.
Very nice. Very nice. And I don't have any dispute with any of your facts, Paul. Woo! Doreen, you are up next.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Doreen Bechtal. I use she, her pronouns. Let's see, I am, as Paul indicated, I am one of the co-program directors of the Shakespeare and Performance Program, along with my colleague Matt, and someone who is not here today, Dr. Peter Kerwin is we have a triumvirate as program directors. It took 3 of us actually to do Paul's one job. So. I came to Mary Baldwin. Let's see. Okay. To be honest, I worked with the Mary Baldwin Graduate Program the same year that I started at the American Shakespeare Center, which was back in 2002. And at that point, it was called Shenandoah Shakespeare Express.
Were
we Express or?
And then we dropped the Express before we then became American Shakespeare Center, because, you know, why settle on one name when you could have 3 or 4?
Yeah. That's right. So, you know, at that point in 2002, when I arrived in Stanton to work with Jim and Shenandoah Shakespeare Express, at that point, I came as an actor and a choreographer. So movement choreographer, dance, acrobatics. My claim to fame at the ASE is the only person who's descended from the heavens in a circus hoop. Yeah, so that's what brought me to Stanton, really where I met you, Jim. I'm kind of jumbling things together, but we were working with the first graduate student class at Mary Baldwin, of which there were only maybe six or seven. Yeah, seven. Yeah, 7 students. And the acting company, we would join their classes. We might mentor. We would do scene work with them. It was really an integrated, evolving conversation with those students. And so my role changed throughout the years as a collaborator in the early days, an adjunct professor, and then I actually, Paul had invited me to get my master's degree. Really, I had been taking classes at Mary Baldwin because we had a program where actors could learn alongside, and I had, I think, taken enough classes that I had maybe a year and a half to 2 years just to get my master's, which I did. At the same time, I started working on building and redesigning the new MFA company, which is where Matt sort of joins into that narrative as well. And then after I graduated, immediately upon graduating, I started on at Mary Baldwin as the MFA company manager and professor, assistant professor. And here I am now, 14 years later, full professor as of most recently, and still working at the ASC as their movement consultant, and support the work in both organizations still to this day.
Can I say really one quick thing, Jim? I still have on my laptop here a folder called The Plan, in which Doreen and I sat down and plotted every single move that she has just delineated for you. Although I don't think we took it all the way up to last week when you were named a full professor, but we got pretty far into it. So I'm really pleased
Yeah.
with it all worked out.
Yeah.
So does that mean that your enrollment in the Mary Baldwin MLit MFA program started after Paul got there, or you were doing it before he got there as well?
Well, yeah, I guess I started taking classes before Paul got there, but then I enrolled as a full-time student when Paul arrived, not long after Paul arrived, I would say, maybe
Gotcha.
2009, I think you finished your MFA.
2009.
Right. Well, yeah, because that's in the plan.
It was all part of the plan. Yeah.
Right.
But okay, I will say that I feel like I should have met you before 2002 when I arrived, Jim, because I worked with a company called Foolery over in Charlottesville, which is when I met Paul, but that's also where I met several company members who were part of Shenandoah Shakespeare Express, who were JMU students, James Madison University students who were there from the beginning days. So I knew you, I knew of you, but I think we may have met for the first time in New York City when you came up to audition for the first resident troupe.
I saw you as an actor in shows at Foolery before you auditioned, but you're right. I don't think we met until you auditioned in New York.
Yeah.
Number 3 on the hit list, Matt Davis.
Nowhere near as interesting. I mean, I'm the oldest and also the youngest, right? Because of the three of us here, I have seniority in years, but not in experience at the with the long march of Shenandoah Shakespeare Express. I came to work at the Shakespeare Performance Program in 2010. I've met Paul a little earlier when friends of ours were doing one of his shows, and down in Austin, Texas, which is where I was doing my my graduate work, and various things led to me coming here, which was wonderful. What is interesting is I did know about this program because I had been touring with a company, which, you know, some people would say was the competition with Shenandoah Shakespeare, which I don't believe it ever was, because we did very different things, right? But there were two touring companies that used to go to universities and schools. We went more to universities, which is called Atherstone London Stage, AFPLS, very snappy title, with British Company of Actors touring around. And I think, you know, me and a colleague of mine called Anna Northam, who many of you here will know, we were both on this tour, and we sort of walked up a mountain one Sunday afternoon in Utah, and by the time we got down the mountain, we decided that she was going to go and audition for this new company in Virginia, and I was going to apply to grad school at UT Austin. So, and that would have been in 2003. So I mean, I can get back there. I can chart us back a little bit, right, to the early stages. So that's when I first vaguely heard of this new company that had started this new program, and Anna was one of the first, right, from third year in or something. I don't know, whatever. Obviously I met Doreen and JP immediately, and it was very clear that we were going to be working together closely. And we've just done Doreen, is it our 14th first year show at the Blackfriars? So, you know, we do a lot of co-directing together, which is not a common experience, but we make it a part of our program to collaborate on all levels, including directing, which is, you know, one of the rarer and harder things to do. Luckily, Doreen has a very generous partner who, you know, that's how it works. Jim, when did I meet? I mean, I met you, Jim, I suppose 2009, I think at the conference, the Blackfriars, probably at the Blackfriars conference, I guess, right?
Yep.
Which was like a protracted job talk for me.
And it took me a while to get to the point where I was, hey, Matt, would you like to direct for the American Shakespeare Center? And I hired you to do that, and then I left before you did that.
I know. It was sad. It was sad. Yeah, and it was. I loved that experience. Love's Labour's Lost, 2017. A troublesome, difficult year on many counts, but and I've subsequently acted in a number of seasons and just recently directed Dracula, the Comedy of Terrors, which is clearly where my skills lie, is in city comedy.
Nice. Nice. Okay, so here's the overview plan of what I would like to try to do. I would like to start by talking with Paul in honor of this being the end of Shakespeare's birthday week, about Paul's biography of Shakespeare. And I want to weave in and out of different parts of his book by discussing different parts of the Mary Baldwin Shakespeare and Performance program. So I'm going to ask Paul and Matt and Doreen lots of questions that evolve around, hopefully, each other to some degree. We'll have a time for Q&A where folks get to ask questions. We will give you a brief update on our American Globe Center project here in Connecticut. And we'll talk a little bit about ways that you can help us keep pushing forward on that. But I would like to say to our three panelists that the audience makeup for where we are right now, and this is being recorded for our members on stageable.com. Eventually that will be a part of a podcast. Our audience will have a mix of knowledge and background. There are some people that are S&P grads. There are some folks that will be possible future S&P students. There'll be folks who know a lot about Shakespeare and folks who know very little, and folks who think they know a lot about Shakespeare and perhaps know very little. So it's a wide demographic that y'all are talking to. So keep that in mind as you talk. And if there's anything that comes up that I think maybe, oh gosh, that might be inside baseball, could you explain this thing a little bit better? I'll let you know if that happens. So what I would like to do, Dr. Paul Menzer, is do the question that every interviewer would probably do for you as the author of this biography. And that is asking, what was the motivation for putting another biography of Shakespeare out there? And related to that, what do you think makes this biography special?
What makes it special is I wrote it.
Ding, ding, ding.
He said grandly. What motivated it was being asked to do it by Bloomsbury when they were sort of contemplating Arden 4. So Arden 4 is the newest sort of iteration of the complete works of William Shakespeare that Arden has been publishing since 1899 when Arden 1 came out, and then it's at basically sort of 25-year periods over the last century and a quarter, Arden has been reissuing their wonderful single text editions of Shakespeare across the years. And it's a little bit like painting the Pentagon. I'm told that it's so big that by the time you get to the end of it, you have to start painting it again. And that is roughly the compelling logic of what Arden does with the complete works of Shakespeare. When they finally get done they start over again. And so they've started in 2020, I think, with Arden 4. So the next iteration of single text plays issued by Arden. And the first play text proper will come out, I think, in the fall. I think there'll be 3 texts: Lear, Caesar, and The Tempest, I believe, are going to come out first. But what they thought that they might do, which was unusual, is launch Arden 4 with a biography of Shakespeare, and asked me to write a standalone biography, a brief standalone biography to kind of launch Arden 4. And so it turns out it takes a lot less time to write a biography of Shakespeare than to edit one of his plays, because this biography came out in 2023, and the first edition of Arden, as I said, is not going to be out until fall 2025 at the earliest. And so what motivated it was being asked to do it and be part of a very august, venerable series of Shakespeare's plays. So I was really flattered to do it. And also, as a fundamentally lazy person, I thought to myself, well, to write a biography of Shakespeare, there's really barely any new archival research that one has to do. You just have to read a bunch of Shakespeare biographies and then try to sort of decant all of them into a snifter of a taste of Shakespeare, particularly because I was given a word limit of about 75,000 words, I think, which in the tradition of Shakespearean biography is quite brief. And in fact, the biography is called William Shakespeare, A Brief Life. What makes it different is not that I wrote it, but that what I have tried to do in this biography is tell the story of Shakespeare's life while telling the story of Shakespeare's life. And by that I mean to have a lightly meta approach to it, to try to sort of both retell and in some cases, though, puncture some of the myths that we use to organize and control the story of Shakespeare's life. And what's ironic about this, and Jim was kind enough to sort of hold up a copy of the book, is I'm lucky enough that Arden has come back to me and asked me to do a second edition of it, and sort of rewrite it or repackage it a little bit for a more general readership, so sort of a trade publication. And so, in point of fact, the timing of this is really interesting. This rewritten biography of mine was due at the publishers, or is due at the publishers on May 1st, next week. And then a certain something popped up in the headlines on Shakespeare's birthday. I thought I was well clear. I thought I was free, without having to do any sort of major reworking. I'd rewritten the introduction, and then this news of the letter to Anne Hathaway, to Anne Shakespeare, actually, came up, and so I have to sort of redigest what I was going to do, and I've written to the publisher and said I'm going to need a few more weeks. Because you've got to think about this.
For those who might not have seen the headline, what is it, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So on Shakespeare's birthday, just a few days ago, there are headlines in The Guardian and then The Washington Post and elsewhere, the BBC, NPR, that a scholar named Matt Stagel, a very fine scholar at the University of Bristol, has done a great deal of work of authenticating and making an argument for a letter that has been obscurely known about for some time, which was a letter that was discovered in 1978, addressed to Mrs. Shakespeare. And it was found in the binding of a book. It's in a library up in Hertfordshire, I think, one of those H words, something like that. It was found as sort of the waste material that was used to stiffen the binding of a book. And it was discovered in 1978. And it has sort of been, but at the time, scholars were not able to do any of the authentication work to try to sort of place it. And what it is, it's a letter to Mrs. Shakespeare. It's essentially a dunning letter trying to extract money that William Shakespeare had promised. As often happened in the period, a young apprentice's father had died, and William Shakespeare was asked to hold money as a surety until he came of age. Okay, this happened a lot because the little boy's mother was, I don't know, like women could not kind of control the financial wherewithal of the boy, and so Shakespeare was asked to hold the money until the boy was finished his apprenticeship, and then the boy finished his apprenticeship, and Shakespeare didn't come over with the money, right? And in some ways, what strikes me as helping to provide this authenticity is that Shakespeare never paid a bill until he absolutely had to, and often not even then. And so Shakespeare seemingly was slow to pay. And so this letter was to Mrs. Shakespeare saying, can you get the money that has been promised to this young apprentice, right? So that's sort of the story of this letter. What Matt Stagel was able to do, and so the letter mentions the name of the boy and a couple of other individuals, and a geographical location called Trinity Lane in London. Now, what we have at our disposal now that was not available in 1978 is massive digitized databases of parish records, of apprentice records, of geographical locations and origins. So now you can search the entire corpus of the archives in a few hours rather than a few lifetimes. And with access to these databases, this scholar has worked through that there were 4 potential Shakespeares living in London under the period in question. And he's gone through and made a very compelling argument, a persuasive argument, not a clinching argument, but a persuasive argument that indeed this letter was addressed to Mrs. Shakespeare, the wife of our man Will. Okay. So this is interesting in a couple of ways. Number one, probably the most interesting thing is it refers to when Mrs. Shakespeare lived with William Shakespeare on Trinity Lane in London. Okay. So number one, we never had Trinity Lane as an address that we could have located Shakespeare. And it's in a neighborhood quite close to the Blackfriars, in fact, at Queen Heights Landing, right across the river from the Globe. But of course, I think as all of you know, the framing narrative, one of the framing narratives of Shakespeare's life is that Anne Shakespeare never left Stratford, never lived in London. Shakespeare. And so if true, this kind of changes everything in terms of what we think about their marriage. Now, many of the headlines, when this letter sort of has been sort of authenticated, as it were, was like, well, this proves that they had a loving marriage, as opposed to the old saw that they didn't. Now, to me, I never believed, there's no evidence that they had a bad marriage, right? And this certainly doesn't prove evidence that they did, right? The fact that Anne may have been with him in London for some time, I don't think proves very much about their relationship, other than that she was in London with him for a time. And that is new, if true, and does really change the way that we sort of frame Shakespeare's seeming work-life separation for Stratford and London. And I could go on and on about this, and I probably should, but it is really a very powerful discovery. You know, I've read now the long academic article, which has come out in a British journal called Shakespeare. And Matt is a fantastic scholar, and he has dotted every I and crossed every T twice. And it's a very persuasive case that this indeed is a letter to Anne Shakespeare asking for money and locating Anne with William Shakespeare in Trinity Lane, probably between the years 1603 and 1608, in a neighborhood quite close to the Blackfriars.
In your biography, you talk about where he might have lived once the Globe was built.
Yeah.
And was that based on records that we have, and this is contrary to that or adds to that?
Adds to that, right? Shakespeare moved around a lot in London, apparently, and this adds to the dots on the map, right? And sort of actually sort of fills in some blanks a little bit, because we thought he was still living in Silver Lane when he was working at the Globe, and that's a little bit of a commute, right? This actually places him in greater proximity to both the Blackfriars and to, you know, being able to sort of take a ferry across the Thames to the Globe. So it puts another sort of dot on the radar of having us kind of geolocate Shakespeare during these periods. So it does not contradict the record.
Okay, so that brings an overview of the biography up to date with something that is in the news right now. Vibing off of that, switching over to Matt and Doreen, I would love for you to be able to tell us, what is the Shakespeare and Performance program right now? You know, I'm hoping to get to some things about what it was in the past that led to now, and stuff about the future. But how would you describe what this program is, what you are trying to accomplish in it right now? And this will happen a few times as I ask questions. What I think I know about the two of you, I have no idea how to separate the question to, well, this part is for you, Matt, and this part is for you, Doreen. So I throw it out to y'all to decide how you want to tag team on that.
Yeah. One of us starts talking and then the other one takes over. Okay, so where are we now? We are a 3-year Master of Letters and MFA program, which is 2 degrees. And the first 2 years is the Master of Letters program that is looking at a body of courses that focus on both scholarship and practice. That's who we are, the Shakespeare and Performance. In addition, our 3rd year, the MFA year, is a very different model. It's a company model, and in many ways was based off of not only Shakespeare's company, but also the ASC, Shenandoah Shakespeare. It's very much rooted in the work that we did, that still continues on this day. And we can go in those details maybe a little bit later. But what we're rooted in, the pillars of our program are based in scholarship and performance practice, but also underneath that umbrella, it is collaboration, multidisciplinarity, and entrepreneurialism. So we come at the field of Shakespeare and Shakespeare studies and contemporaries from lots of different angles. But the glue that holds us together is collaboration, working from all different backgrounds and perspectives. So students that come to us are from theater backgrounds, English, history, sometimes anthropology, psychology, and everyone is marshaling our intellectual and performative resources toward classical theater. I'll let Matt kind of pick up.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's pretty good. You know, if the bumper sticker on the very wide 1950s car, American car, would be offering a Renaissance education in Renaissance drama, right? So, you know, the idea that the multi-hyphenate theatre maker and thinker is better prepared to advance a protracted, prolonged career than somebody who is focused singularly on one area and one discipline. And sort of the people that we attract are those who are very happy and, in fact, really need to wear more than one hat. We suggest you don't wear two hats at the same time because it's not a good fashion statement. But you have the ability to take a hat off and know when to take it off and know when to put it on, right? So we obviously really attract people who, you know, who say, well, I'm an actor, but I'm also a director. Does that mean I can no longer be an actor, right? There has to be this distinction. And of course, you know, the French have this phrase, they call it the arthritis of specialization. That is not a Renaissance ideal, right? I mean, Shakespeare was not a specialist, thank goodness, right? Otherwise, he would not have made the money he made, and he would not have had Paul write a biography about him. And another way, therefore, to think about it, I think, is, and the way that it's evolving and has been evolving, certainly for me, and I spent a lot of time first point of contact with candidates for our program, is that Shakespeare, you know, means a variety of things. But people go, what does Shakespeare mean now, right? And you've got Shakespeare, the person who the fantasy doesn't live with his wife, and you know, and has his love is his mistress is the theatre, and various other people he writes sonnets for. A very romantic notion about Shakespeare as the single author, right? So one of the things we're looking at is thinking about who is Shakespeare, what does Shakespeare even mean nowadays, what does Shakespeare represent, right? The Shakespeare industry. I think we're also thinking of Shakespeare as this kind of multi-hyphenate ideal, right, of somebody who, or of a way of approaching our discipline, not as a single sort of cell organism, but something that's very, very complex. And finally, actually thinking of Shakespeare as company, right? What we don't often think about is company, what that company or those few companies, particularly that company, did to revolutionize the idea of how we run a company with sharers who take full responsibility, shared responsibility and ownership for their company. So that's where the kind of collaborative element sort of comes into it, you know. So yeah, it's complicating, I hope, what we mean by Shakespeare in very many ways.
And our program, just to finish that off, students come to us and then they concentrate in education, acting, directing, and dramaturgy. And as Matt said, in their third year, they select a concentration. However, they have to flex their muscles in all of those areas. So in essence, we're training the multi-hyphenate theater maker across all of the disciplines. Yeah.
So that's actually answering a question, if I heard you right, that I was going to ask later about S&P past. So the concentrations are still there. I thought I don't know if that has shifted over the years, or it's the same as it's always been, in terms of, I know that students come in perhaps wanting, thinking I'm an actor, I'm not these other things, or I'm a director, I'm not these other things, and they are participating on all of those levels. Do their degrees offer that concentration name in it?
No, you get an MFA in Shakespearean performance. So you can, yeah, this is a kind of key element that maybe has shifted from the earlier days. So you can't say I have an MFA in directing. If you have an MFA in directing, that there are SACS requirements for what it is that you need to take to get that MFA in directing. So what we say is, you can say to somebody, you can apply for a job and you can say, I have an MFA in Shakespeare performance with a concentration in directing. And if you want a letter of recommendation from me, I will say, this person had a concentration in directing. And there is an implication. We do assess people on their concentration. It's one of the areas of assessment that lands up on the transcript. So it does sort of matter what concentration you take. Jessie and I had many long talks about whether she should be an acting concentration or a directing concentration, because she is both. And it's always complicated because there are people here who are literally both things, right? And trying to pull them apart it's like trying to tear some limbs off of somebody. It's not fair. It's cruel.
Vibing off of what you said regarding the third year and company, switching back to Paul, what is in your book or not in your book about the company of players of which Shakespeare was a part that you think is worth noting here? And we'll get to the nomenclature thing in a second. I'll let you answer that question first.
Well, I'm struck by, this is such like a fabulous group of people to be with, because I'm looking at people who I've worked with in various capacities for a long time now, and you all are aging. I'm not, obviously, but so like looking at our collective faces and thinking about our long arc of work together in various ways. And the reason I'm starting there is I think in my book a lot about how Shakespeare had a remarkable durability and stability of the close individuals with whom he worked across his professional career. And one of the things I try to take on board is, when he got to London and fell in with this particular group of players, they were relatively young men. I use the term advisedly and accurately in this case, right? They were young men who were working together, and they aged together, and the work aged and potentially matured together at the same time. And probably they began their work. And Shakespeare was unusual in that he was a married man and a father at the time he joined a company of largely bachelors and childless men. And over the course of his time working with sort of those 7 to 8 close individuals, they kind of grew up together. And I think about that a lot in the ways that impacted the arc of the art that they created together, and think about the role of friendship in Shakespeare's life and the way it impacted his work. And one of the things I try to think about a lot in the book is who was Shakespeare's best friend? And thinking about it's because he so often wrote about these friendships, these male friendships, these close male friendships in his plays. And so Hamlet and Horatio, Brutus Cassius, these complicated close relationships. I try to think sometimes about who among those group of players might have been Shakespeare's best friend. And I don't think there's any answer to that. But I do try to think about the durability and stability and the maturity of the people with whom he worked quite closely, and the ways that life relationship is inextricable from the art that he created. Playwriting is it's so difficult and fascinating to write a biography of a playwright, because unlike other sort of fiction writers, playwrights disperse their voice sort of so widely that it evaporates. So to try to locate the voice of the author or the writer in a single character is a fool's errand. You can probably do it with a little bit more success with a writer of lyric poetry or a novelist, potentially, although they're complicated as well. And so one of the things I try to do in the book is think about Shakespeare as a company man and in particular those close friendships, and probably contentious friendships at times, with the people he worked for a long period of time.
Back to the nomenclature thing. One of the quotes that I wrote down here that I thought was worth mentioning is the first thing to say about Shakespeare's company is that they were not Shakespeare's company.
Right. Yeah. Yes, I think in the book I say something like, it would have very much surprised Richard Burbage and a number of other financial investors in the company to hear it referred to these many years later as Shakespeare's company. Like, well, 1/8 of it was Shakespeare's company, but it was not Shakespeare's company any more than it was Shakespeare's England, or the Shakespearean age, right? An act of sort of, I don't know, retrospective colonialism. But Shakespeare was, a co-sharer and investor with a number of other folks. And so it wasn't Shakespeare's company, quite literally, and here I'm being a bit pedantic, but I think it's important to remember, it wasn't Shakespeare's company or Burbage's company or Hemmings and Condell's company. It was the Lord Chamberlain's company, or it was the King's company, right? They were a group of liveried servants, right? One of the other things I go on at some length about in the book is, like, we tend to call them the King's men, as though they were this sort of jolly group of, sort of Robin Hood's merry men and sort of thing. Like, they had a boss, right? They were liveried servants within the household of aristocrats, whether it was Lord Hopson, the Lord Chamberlain, or later on the King. And so it's important to think about, like, they were in a vertically integrated kind of compact of labor relations, and they worked for the King, or they worked for the Lord Chamberlains. They didn't work for one another.
And we work for the provost.
That's right.
Well, and I thought that was a fascinating piece in you talking about just the names that we know of in terms of Lord Chamberlain's men versus Lord Chamberlain's servants.
Correct. Yeah.
So how often does servant appear in records as opposed to men?
You won't. Now, you kind of never say never in this world, right? But you will seek hard to try to find these playing companies referred to as somebody's men in the historical documents of the period. They're almost always referred to as the servants, right? So you look at the title pages of some of those early quartos or octavos, it would say sort of like, the Lord Chamberlain's servants playing at their usual place of recreation at the Globe or the Blackfriars, right? Yeah.
I take it that you still weren't tempted to change the name of the program from Shakespeare in Performance to a bunch of these other guys in Performance.
Shakespeare's Big Blue, baby. That's what attracts folks. But though we always use, I think I'll let Matt and Doreen chime in. And we really use Shakespeare as a sort of synecdoche for this kind of entire world of theater making. Shakespeare for me has always been a place to center my own interest in a lot of different playwrights and a lot of different kinds of sort of artistic expression. And I think for many people, Shakespeare has become that as well, a place where you can sort of locate yourself at the center of a nexus of certain kinds of sort of energies and so forth.
Let me frame this question this way to you, Matt and Doreen. Coming off of the idea of the third year company, vibing off of what Paul was talking about regarding the Lord Chamberlain servants, the King's servants, and those companies, you two direct together, you recruit together, you do a lot of things in this program together. Starting with you, Doreen, what would you call your specialties in what you bring to the table as part of this leadership team? I should say, by the way, that Dr. Kerwin was invited to this and could not make it. So I did not leave him out because I like him the least.
He's moving today.
Yeah.
He's
Yes.
literally moving house.
Moving.
And full disclosure, I was getting my MFA from the Mary Baldwin Shakespeare Performance Program and was part of Dr. Kerwin's first classes. So because he's not here, I'm going to call him my favorite.
Okay. Yeah. So My background is is a movement practitioner, a performer and a director and choreographer and a deviser of original work. So, but the lens through which I make theater is through the body, and so I bring a bit of a physical dramaturgy lens into the program. I think about which what that might mean. That might mean in terms of working on plays as a practitioner. I think about how to train an ensemble physically. So that's a big part of what I also bring to the table is ensemble work. How to train a group of people to think, move, breathe, respond, listen as a company. I think that comes from years of being involved in different athletics and dance companies and theater companies. Being inside of a company to me has always been part of my identity. I think having a coach for a father is probably where it all began. What can a group do together who trains together, who develops a common vocabulary? How far can they go? Kind of what Paul, you were talking to, this sort of what can people who work closely together accomplish after years, sustained through years and years. So you might find me in a classroom teaching physical training from contemporary practices. Viewpoints in Suzuki is my jam. Also acrobatics. I might be choreographing a dance, or thinking about how to do period style work and teach maybe what a bow or a curtsy looks like from the period, to maybe building a pyramid of bodies to represent Juliet's balcony for a touring production of Romeo and Juliet where they can't take their set with them. I also work with devising, so original, so thinking through approaching the text as inspiration and thinking about how time and space operate within the world, how gesture operates within the world of classical theater. So my approach is all through the body. However, it's rooted in close reading of texts. So I think that's one of the things that our program really is a hallmark of approaching close reading, whether that's through the lens of studying scansion and rhetoric, or whether that's through the lens of taking a history class and understanding a lot of the historical references that are embedded within the text, or taking voice, or taking acting. So really getting into the DNA of the language via then the body. That's what I do. Yeah.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I do the opposite. That's only slightly facetious. I mean, I think that the strength of, I think what Paul's point is really well made, that obviously Pete Cohen came in as a replacement when Ralph Cohen, our founder, co-founder, he retired. So there's been incredible stability within the core faculty of the program for a long time, and it's partly because I think there's a good, healthy balance of perspectives that meet in a place, of stability. So for me, I come from 20 years of being very much a professional actor in the UK, sometime director, the much more traditional agent, working actor, jobbing, all of that. And so for me, I always, I think my sort of initial job really was to bring that sense of like, how are you going to get a job? How are you going to work? Right. So, and I'm always interested in how are you going to work? And it's always been a part of my, my MO really. I remember when I interviewed for the job with Paul there, I said the one thing that would keep me awake at night if I thought that people couldn't work once they got our degree. that wouldn't be right. And in fact, our students do work. So I very much, I teach acting and directing. My intersection, I think, is the blending of what I call formalist approaches, to the text, with an interest in contemporary methods of acting. Stanislavski and Shakespeare has always been an interesting connection for me, exploring that, always contentious, always difficult, which is where I think acting should be. So I'm very interested in blending the contemporary with the traditional kind of models, or psychological versus classical acting, as I think Barton described it right in his first chapter of his book. And so that's where my focus is. And what's interesting though is that these are both real and false binaries, right? Because in a sense, Doreen and I think work well together, because we always want to get to the same place. We'll often just come at it from a different angle, because we tend to go, well, we know where we need to be here. And it might be we do it this way, or might do it that way. Because I'm not trained in movement, I love seeing movement on stage. It's a part of my directing as well. So just as I know that, Doreen is one of the closest readers of texts that I know, on a very granular word by word level. What does that word mean? Why are you saying that word now? Is something you'll hear coming out of Doreen's mouth all the time, right? So these are both real and false dichotomies, really, and which is what I think is what makes it healthy.
Let me ask one more set of questions to y'all before we open it up to questions from other folks that are here. And rather than sticking with the pattern and going back to Paul, let me vibe off of what you just said, Doreen and Matt, and ask, what kinds of students do you think thrive in your program? And are there common areas that many folks struggle with? Because everybody's going to struggle in a grad program, but are there things that you think are umbrella ideas that these folks who like this kind of stuff thrive in this program, and here are the areas that are a little bit more of a common challenge to folks?
Yeah, I think going back to some of the things we were saying earlier about being a multi-hyphenate theater maker, I think those are the students who are most attracted, who don't want to choose. I just want to go into an acting. I'm an actor and a director, or I'm also like dramaturgy, or I'm a real good manager and I want to be an actor manager. So I think it's people who come to us who have different backgrounds and don't want to specialize is one. But also, I would say the thing that I've been seeing maybe in the past couple of years are people want a collaborative environment rather than something that feels maybe more traditionally competitive. So there's a lot of people who are interested in and invested in discovering community and thinking about how to build a community of like-minded souls. And that has translated into people then going off to create their own companies. And just looking at Jesse Lillis right here, who is an excellent example. So people who are coming to us because they're interested in working in a community of pooling resources and collaborating rather than honing just as a solo working artist, which maybe that is the economy now, and it makes a heap ton of sense.
I will say that it's interesting that we're not a conservatory, and we say it right on the front of every website, every piece of material. We are not a conservatory, right? And if we have certainly directed people after 6 months in our program, said, I think a conservatory is where you need to be, right? And we will try and help you get there because that's the right training for you. What is interesting is that the conservatories are suffering a little bit at the moment, and now there will be many reasons for that that are more complicated than I know could go into now. But I will say that one of the things we're noticing at the big regional audition centers is a lot more crossover between interestingly the British training schools and the American training schools than there used to be. And also now we're starting to see things like MFA in acting stroke directing. We're starting to see this bifurcation or this multi-hyphen, and I think that has to be driven by the coming generation, by the young students and what they want, as opposed to what we tell them they should have. So I think that, inevitably the students will be the ones who will change the discipline. They are the future.
Can I say something really quick? The question wasn't addressed to me, but it's a fantastic one, and I have just one thing to say about it. I mean, it's so interesting to have taught now for, I guess, almost 20 years in this program, because you watch the students come through the program and their interests change, and their desires change. And Jim asked a kind of poignant question, which students who perhaps may have sort of struggled sometimes with the program, and I would say, from time to time, and I say this without prejudice, in my early years of teaching the program, there were students who came into the program who thought Shakespeare was a place to hide from modernity. And I had great sympathy. I want to hide from modernity too, increasingly. And I get that, but the past is not a place to shelter in. And one of the things that's so compelling about teaching now is the students who come into the classroom, they do not want to hide in Shakespeare. They want to work in Shakespeare as a way of challenging the most sort of compelling problems of a particular moment. And so it's been a kind of extraordinary to watch that sort of shift in the desires and the interests of the students who have come through our program. And certainly the questions that they ask of us now that challenge me and perhaps maybe challenge my colleagues are very different than they were 15, 16, 17 years ago. And so the students today, I don't think, struggle with the contemporaneity of Shakespeare, right? And it's really a wonderful thing to do, and it keeps us on our toes for sure.
Because you make a point out of saying this is not a conservatory, the combination of what you're talking about makes so much sense for fostering and growing theater makers to create their own stuff, to do what Jesse has done, to do what John Tucker has done, to do what Jeremy Fiebig, lots of graduates from the program started their own companies. Because it's not a conservatory, do you shy away from the other part of possibilities where you're looking at what practicing Shakespeare companies say they want in their actors, in their directors? Is that the kind of thing that is better placed on conservatories than your program, or is that in the ether somewhere too for y'all?
It's interesting. I think I'm not sure if I'm totally answering the question, but I feel like the training they receive in terms of acting, directing, like you're saying, that launches careers, is they come at the Shakespeare industry, thinking about the MFA company, being versed in how to craft an educational touring show that will go to middle school, high school. They're also, most recent companies wanted to focus on theater for young audiences. So we've now had a couple successful years of a TYA adaptation of Shakespeare geared for 4, 5, 6-year-olds. Then they train in the small scale format, which is something that Matt, with Actors from the London Stage, brought to us, which five-handed Shakespeare, or anywhere from 4 to 5 actors playing all the parts, and that show is light. It's meant to tour. You can put it in a storefront or a college or a winery. So it's storytelling with very few people. So it's very economical. And then their students train working in the Blackfriars Playhouse. So they are working in an early modern recreation. They're understanding how to work within that architecture with a big audience and a big budget. And they're working with a guest director, so they're networking and learning new inroads and bringing new conversations into our program. And then they finish with a Renaissance style show, like the ASE's Early Actors Renaissance season, where they're looking at Renaissance rehearsal practices, like working from cue scripts, no director, no designer, and a very limited time. So they are training in kind of every 6 months or 6 weeks, they're training new skill sets that speak to a wider Shakespeare industry. So I think that and in some cases, I know this is just in their 3rd year alone. So they might be involved, and they're also doing a devised original piece that is, so they're studying and their skill set when they come out of the program is really remarkable, even though we're not conservatory and we're focused on Shakespeare and his contemporaries, a particular time, but their practice is really wide
Right.
and savvy to, I think, the industry.
I think that, so that, and that's right. So a way to, Jim, to get at your question, I think from another angle, seems relevant, is that, if you go to a conservatory, you are training. There are 2 ways you can train, right? You can train by training yourself in various ways. So you will have, a conservatory where you will have 3 different voice classes over the time that you are there. You will have various kinds of movement classes. You'll have acting 1, 2, and 3 and auditions, right? Or whatever it might be. You will be very much training yourself as an instrument to go out and be an actor. And there is another way of training as an actor, which is how I did it, because I never trained as an actor, was I just went and worked. And I'm not saying that one or other is right or wrong. It really doesn't matter, right? I mean, at the time when I was a young actor, certainly about 1/3 of the actors came through universities, 1/3 of them just came through somewhere, and 1/3 of them came through drama schools, right, in the UK. And it was pretty much, that was the ratio. And everyone was like, it's fine. It's a mixed bag. It's a mixed, funny profession. They come from all over the place. And so our version is really put students in multiple different genres as if they're doing a bunch of different shows in their first couple of years as an actor, but not necessarily just making mistakes as I did in front of a paying public. It's not the public. But so, yeah, it's a less instrument focused, more genre focused way of training, I guess.
I hear you. And certainly students get to do more stuff in your program than they get to do in a lot of other programs. And they get to do a variety of stuff, even though it's Shakespeare and performance. They do a lot of Shakespeare. They do a lot of things that are not Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
Let me wrap up this question part of things, going back to the biography, Paul. You mentioned that one of your goals was to puncture some of the myths about Shakespeare, or separate myths from fact. One of the things when I was a student in classes at Mary Baldwin that I had never heard about was this great Renaissance documentary called Shakespeare in Love. And the jokes about how everything in there was considered to be, well, that's what Shakespeare and his company did. And I'm wondering if using that movie as a place to give our audience some myth versus fact stuff might be that might touch on some of the things that you talk about in the book.
Well, I mean, Shakespeare in Love actually is an extraordinary piece of theater history, I would say. I mean, there are some, we can mention a couple of things that are obviously have sort of warped or at least sort of bent the truth a little bit, but really as a sort of piece of atmospheric theatrical history, I think it's really very good as a point of entry into understanding the working environments. I mean, probably, and kind of obviously, The place where it takes the most license with the truth is Queen Elizabeth coming to the theater, right? Queen Elizabeth didn't go to the theater. The theater went to Queen Elizabeth, right? Shakespeare and his co-workers went up to court to put on plays for the Queen or the King, as the case may be. And so that's, I don't know if people sort of ever sort of bought the myth of the idea that that the Queen or the King might have showed up at the theater, but that's certainly a piece. If it is a myth, it's worth puncturing a little bit. But one of the things that Shakespeare in Love does that is so enticing, it imagines that the life of the writer is reflected in the art that they created. And for the most part, only creative artists imagine and believe that their like sort of life biography actually has an imprint upon the art that they create. It's a much more respectable, critical standpoint to think like, well, you can separate the art from the life. And one of the things that's difficult about writing the biography of Shakespeare is because people have been sort of working the archives, sifting the archives for 400 plus years now, we actually have discovered quite a bit about the life of William Shakespeare, but almost nothing that we have discovered explains whatsoever the mystery of the art, of the creative life. You look at the archival traces of Shakespeare across the years and you see the life of a quite successful emergent bourgeois gentleman who had some financial successes and acquired for himself the trappings of aristocracy by purchasing a coat of arms and a name, and then retired relatively wealthy and bought the biggest house in the town he came from. Nothing in the archives will tell you anything about the art that he created, except that maybe it does, right? Except that maybe somebody who can sort of manage a pretty financially complicated bit of property acquisition doesn't have that much trouble sort of also plotting something as fiendishly complex as Cymbeline, right? That's somebody who can sort of like manage to sort of think strategically and at scale about the complex intertwining of mutual competing desires and interests, is also pretty good at writing plays. Is also probably pretty good at dabbling in real estate.
Nice. I've got a million other questions, but I'm going to stop to let other folks ask questions. So who's got questions for these three folks? Who's going to be the first?
I wanted to thank you guys for, I learned a lot in this short hour, but it's just been fascinating. One of the things that I really love that you've kind of all spoken to is the nature of company versus cast, right? And how I think, Doreen, you mentioned, kindred souls working together and how the program really leans into that. I remember, so my name's Tom Evans, everybody. Hi, I'm the executive director of the American Globe Center. I first worked with Jim in 1998 on the Tough Love tour back in the Shenandoah Shakespeare Express days. And we had a member of our company, his name was Brian Taylor, and Brian would always shout ensemble. And what that meant was that we're all on the same page. We're all working together. It's not really an ego-driven thing. And I think that's the beauty of company, right? And especially repertory company, because you have to find that balance. It's not an ego thing. And sometimes, all blessings to those who have gone through conservatory programs, they are extremely difficult and they are very finely self-tuned, Matt, to your point. But sometimes that does come out with a more competitive spirit, and it's about me and my career and how do I advance that. And sometimes, not all the time, but the beauty of what you guys are creating with this program, and also the sort of scholarly background that feeds it, it does create this truly collaborative environment. And I think the actor-manager sense is a really interesting place for me, Doreen, because that's sort of my role in all of this. I started with Jim as an actor, and now I'm doing a lot of the more businessy stuff, Paul, right? Like, how do we figure out how to finance a $100 million project? But I also still have that passion and love for my ensemble. And I think the servant terminology, Paul and Jim, is fascinating also because, it's very big in the corporate culture, which is the other side of my life, to talk about servant leadership. And when you think about what servant leadership is, it really is that sense of company, right? It's that sense of all of us, the rising tide lifting all the boats. And it's not about one person excelling. And it's interesting that, very heavy capitalistic corporate America also at least claims that they value that servant leadership, which I think our program, and your program brings that to the forefront. So it's just really, thank you guys for sharing all of that. It's just got my brain going in a million different ways. But the king's servants and what that means, the Lord Chamberlain's servants, are also servants to one another and servants to the art itself. And that collaborative nature is just a beautiful thing to see. So thank you for sharing all of that.
I do. Can I jump in on that? I mean, as I do, I worry about, people working. This is what I really worry about. And so sometimes I sort of go, the company model is in some ways a bit of a fantasy in the current climate, because there aren't many repertory companies around anymore, and it's very hard to find a place where you can work with an ensemble for 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. And that's why, and then I think, well, are we doing the right thing here by suggesting that this is the model that is, that is a healthy one? And then I say, again, it's the next generation that's going to decide how the theatre business continues, because it will, because the death of theatre has been announced. It gets announced every generation, right? And so they're going to figure it out. So in fact, then I go, no, it's good, because they're going to work out how to do it, because the current economy isn't great for theatre. Whatever they're doing at the moment is not a wonderful way to run the theatre, right? And so yeah, that's just a comment, really.
But I think bringing that company mentality and that hyphenate mentality into any job environment, it makes you more valuable to that company. Whether it's a financial services job or working in a Broadway cast, having that background in collaborative company, I think really makes you a better part of whatever organization you are working with. So I treasure that you're doing it, and it offers opportunities for folks to find other ways to bring their artistic training into everything that they do. So it's really a valuable tool that you're sharing with the world.
Yeah, I had a student who graduated and came back a year later and said, Doreen, I think I got an MFA in learning how to communicate with other human beings and solve problems together.
Love that.
Nice.
that it really, that incubator of a room and of working together day in and day out, and having to solve problems and having to communicate and having to, acknowledge when failure happens, which is where growth happens as well. It's transformative. You don't feel it necessarily every day, but the accumulation of working together and being in communication with the same people, although a struggle, to borrow Jim's word, probably. But at the end, I feel like it's when you come away learning how to communicate, how to ask for support, how to ask for help, how to give help, how to be accountable to a room full of people. It's like you're saying, Tom, all of these amazing life skills that are transferable no matter what. Yeah, and doing it with a sense of a group identity rather than a solo identity is not that the solo identity is still important, but having to think as a group, and make decisions as a group and take everyone with you. And it's really incredible. Yeah.
I love that. Jesse, I don't know if you would mind sharing a little bit. We're talking a lot about what people come out of the company with, or out of that program with. And we have other few folks on the line who also have had the experience, but it kind of brings us all back to the fudge in a way, right? Creative ways to fund your company and stuff
Absolutely.
like that. What are some of your takeaways from having gone through the program?
Yeah, so I finished my MFA from Mary Baldwin in 2020, which I don't know if y'all remember that, but it was a notably bad time for everything, but especially theater. So a bold move on our part to start a company that year. But I think that even just sort of listening to y'all talk about the program and reflecting on my time there, I feel like one of the most important things that I learned and continue to have reinforced at Mary Baldwin was just the ability to pivot, and to, when things go wrong, you don't just quit. in some ways I hate the phrase "the show must go on," but in other ways, like, we have to get the work done. And so maybe it's not going to look like what we thought it was, but we'll figure out a new solution, and maybe the new one will be even better than the original one, which has certainly been, that was definitely the case for my MFA class. A number of times we had a lot of notable struggles our year. And then continuing on to, finishing in 2020, starting my company in the late summer, early fall of that year. We had big ideas right at the beginning that we realized, okay, maybe that's actually like a year 10 idea and not where you start. So I think learning how to kind of take your idea, recraft it, pivot it, change it, listen to feedback you're getting from people. I think as well, a lot of the reason I went to the program was because I didn't want to commit to one thing. I thought at some point I wanted to start a company. I thought that would be maybe 15 years down the road. But I wanted that at some point, and knowing there was a place where I could get a trial run was exactly what I wanted. And I think that it facilitated an opportunity for me to both get like deep on the scholarship, because that was something that I really liked and that I think is important to making informed decisions about productions and the ways that we adapt for modern audiences and get people excited about these. I want to know where it came from so I can figure out where it's going. But also, having to design costumes, direct plays, act in plays, book tours, manage a company. And so much of, since graduating and running my company, I have now hired a lot of grads of the program, and I've interviewed even more. And I feel like what's great about doing that is getting to see this sort of consistent quality that's coming out, and that there are these people that are so talented in so many different ways that, I only have 5 spots for actors in my company, so I can't hire everyone, but there are always additional things that we need. There's always more jobs in theater. And so there are other ways that these people can still be involved, either with me or with other people. So I feel like it is just that emphasis on the company model, the multi-hyphenate, you can't just be a playwright. You also have to manage the company. You have to do all of these things. I think that is sort of at the heart of the program and is what's so great about it.
I love that. Thank you.
I think that I didn't, when I was a young actor, I used to look at people making their own work, and I thought, how do you do that? Nobody taught me how to make my own work, and they didn't need to teach me. I mean, the point, I didn't have the confidence to make. I didn't know. It's like you were expected to do a certain thing. You get off a job. You go to interviews and you get the job, or you wouldn't get the job, and that was it. And then there were these people who were going, sure, I'll do that, but I'm also going to craft my own work, and sort of that, when you did start to make your own work and then think, oh my goodness, that's a whole other route that many people are just not exploring, and I think that's a key element, and it's a buy-in for me that makes this program valuable, is telling people, be prepared to make your own work.
It sounds like you guys both came away with, confidence and the ability to change gears, right? Because Matt, you learned that through your career. I mean, I was the same way. And even when I went to work for Jim, which was one of my first gigs out of college, the idea of building a company seemed foreign to me, right? That was what somebody else did to give me a job. Somebody who was way more, intelligent and talented and driven. And Jim is many of those things. But I love the fact that, that grew into this. And Jesse, we kicked this off in 2020 also. So we understand the challenges, and we'll come back around to it in a little bit. I want to make sure folks have a chance to ask you questions, but pivoting is very much what we are in the business of these days at the American Globe Center. And we'll be sharing some of that stuff with you guys towards the tail end of the call. But before I dive into that, does anybody else have any questions for our presenters?
Yeah, I do. I guess this is along sort of the same lines, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and Ben Reed and I have talked about it recently. Just sort of the place of theater right now in the culture, and things like employability and what work is out there, and the company model, and repertory theater. And I guess I think a lot about it because I care about Jim and Tom's project a lot. So I've been back to ASC recently too, and it looks different from when I was there in a lot of ways. And I know Vanessa, who's the executive director, and we've had talks, and I see a lot of the pressures of trying to run a rep company. So you guys are in the midst of that. So I don't know if this is for the three, wonderful people who are with us today, who I've been fortunate enough to know and work with. And but maybe it's for you guys. Like, what are the, we're talking about pivoting. Like, what are the biggest pivots in front of you right now compared to 2020, even when you started and looked at this and said, here's how we want to employ actors. Here's what we want to build in Connecticut. I guess my question is, how malleable are you willing to be? And like, what do you see as like the scariest pieces of it for you when it comes to the company? I mean, it's an ugly kind of question to ask, but it's the one that I come back to.
Oh, I don't think it's ugly at all, James. Let me start with an answer about some of that, and let Tom then pick it up to give a little nutshell for those who aren't all that familiar with what we're doing in Connecticut. He'll give a brief thing on that, but also to give you an update on, for those of you that have been following it to some degree, here's where we are now. I am not going to be timid at all about my opinion on this. I think the theater industry is fucking broken. It is wrong in so many ways, spiritually, morally, and leadership wise, and it's not making money. So it's lose-lose. And I actually think that what we're trying to do is revolutionary on some level with how we want to employ people, how we want to embrace that company model, how we want to change this from an industry of gig workers on the performance side and office people who are in the more traditional, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, paid vacation, maternity leave, things that should be part of being a professional actor as well. We're going to try and reset all of that, in part because we think we can do that in a way that is actually smarter business. So the idea of repertory, in my opinion, is a cost saver, is a money maker, because you are able to, what we created there at the Blackfriars, but we also did it on the road even before the Blackfriars by having multiple shows in repertory, the same actors being able to do 3 or 4 shows, same people, allows for multiple performances, different titles, to sell tickets to the same people who are digging it, that you could only sell one ticket to if you were only doing one play at a time. I think that there is an economy in production costs that can happen with repertory if your focus is on putting the money into the actors and the shows and less on the technical effects and the sets. That's sometimes, I think, the biggest hurdle in a modern theatrical approach to repertory is, how do we design the big set and have the big light show and then switch it all over the next day? And I think one of the beauties of trying to tap into some of the power of the Renaissance acting companies is they weren't spending that kind of money on the technical elements. I mean, it wasn't like they didn't. I mean, they had costs. There are production costs associated with shows. But I think that repertory makes more business sense, and more theaters should be trying to do that now. And I think that our idea of being able to employ actors year round, so that when they're not either in a show or rehearsing a show, they are teaching workshops and or being a part of educational events that make money that way and serve the community in that way, that allows for year-round employment in a way that puts the gig actor mentality off to the side and allows people to have year-round thriving careers inside of one theater. Thanks, Jeff. So I think that what we're trying to build is where the industry should be pivoting towards, rather than feeling like, oh shit, here's the horrible economic situation. We need to change what we're going to do based on that. I think that in some ways we are part of the answer on how to fix shit, he says humbly.
And I love the idea of carrying that forward, because one could say, is that scalable? But I think it's scalable by example, right? Because if we can show success there and financial benefit from running things this way, other companies will adapt as well. And our hope is to be able to at some point push these shows into even more commercial markets that we may be doing. I'd love for us to become a feeder for a Broadway company. So now you have a company that's operating on Broadway that has come out of our company. And, we also want people to feel like they're a part of the family and can, come in and work for a few years, and then maybe they're going to go gig for a while. But when they come back, they know they're committing to a long-term experience with us. And, there was this all started in Stratford, as many of you know, at the American Shakespeare Festival Theater site. And one of the things that ran that company into the ground was hiring, movie stars to come in and perform in singular shows for a couple of months. And then, it was great to have that flash in the pan, but it wasn't great financially for the company. We've already said we'll be happy to take any celebrities that want to come in, but they're coming in at the same place everybody else is. And they're going to play, a side servant in Twelfth Night if they're going to be playing the lead in something else. So, it's important that we move all that forward. But as Jim spoke to, it is a challenging climate. It's been a challenging climate since 2020 to build anything theatrical at all. Congrats, Jesse. But to build anything at this scale is challenging. And we also, and Laura Marcus, who's one of my friends who's on the call, has traveled through much of this journey with us, as a lot of you have, from starting out in Stratford. Laura is a Stratford resident. And, we had to make a major pivot, about a year and a half ago, where we said, or almost 2 years ago now, where Stratford said, we don't want the tourism from your projects. It's too big for us. So we pivoted to Norwich. And Norwich, Connecticut, for those of you that don't know, is out on the eastern side of the state. It's where the Mohegan Sun Casino and Foxwoods casinos are. So they have a pretty strong tourism flow going out there anyway, about 20 million people a year. And they're starting to build out their own cultural elements. They do concerts already, and fairly high profile concerts, but they're starting to try to get more family friendly. So they're building water parks and amusement parks and different things that will draw beyond just the gaming crowd out there. So we got referred into Norwich by state officials in Connecticut. So that was a pretty big pivot for us. And then as we did that, we started to have our friends from academia reach out to us as well. And one of our working group members is David Sterling Brown, who works at Trinity as an associate professor. Did I say that right? Yes. I always get it. I'm always checking in. David, hooked us up with some folks in Hartford, Connecticut as well. And Hartford is the capital of the state. So I'm pretty sure I've seen every face on this call before. So I don't need to remind folks that we want to build a Globe, a performing arts center, and a black box theater. So we'd have 3 performance spaces on a campus that would really be sort of, Jim, if I may, be a third space for people where, homework and then us would be another place to go in either of these communities. And there are 2 very different opportunities. And right now we're sort of waiting to figure out which one we're going to end up pivoting to. Things in Norway.
Well, we're pursuing both.
Yes.
Rather than waiting for them, we are pursuing them both.
Well said. So we are actively working. We meet with Norwich every other week, and we talk about what can we do to take the next step to acquire land. They're 2 very different projects at the end of the day. In Norwich, we are a targeted heart of their downtown, which would allow us to overhaul the business community of that city. And things are moving, but they're moving a little slower than we would like. We do have a $3 million bond in with the state legislator that would go to the Norwich Community Development Corporation to help us get our flag firmly planted in the sand there. So that's very much in the mix right now in this session of the legislature. and we're hoping to hear back on that soon. We're doing what we can to help build goodwill with the delegation that represents Norwich, because they're the ones that are going to have to fight for us to land that bond. We also know that we're one thing on a list of many things that need to be bonded in Norwich, and they've already gotten a fair amount of money for other projects. So we're doing what we can to drive that forward, and we're hopeful that it will come through. And even if it doesn't necessarily come through, that doesn't mean Norwich is out of contention. It just means we need to find other ways to purchase the parcels downtown at that beautiful conjunction of those rivers, if Norwich is where we end up going. Hartford is a bit of a different set of circumstances. Yes, sir.
Hang on one second. Before we move on to Hartford, for those of you, I think everybody on this call has been to Stanton, Virginia, I think. Kim, you've been to Stanton? Yes, of course you have. Imagine Stanton, Virginia, 30 years ago, where the downtown Stanton is on the waterfront where three rivers meet. It's like Stanton was 30 years ago in that there has been a bunch of economic development going on. When the SSE came to Stanton, things had already started to shift. And when I tell that story, I say the wave of growth had begun, and we came in and helped turn that into a tsunami, so that we were part of the town becoming more of a tourist destination. And that was with only 300 seats in the Blackfriars. So imagine the beauty of that downtown, but on the water, and parts of the downtown still need to be redeveloped. It's still coming back from being something that is in more distress. But it offers a lot of the same opportunities that we had in Stanton, in this picturesque kind of thing, where us coming in and building this colossus turns it into a small town tourist attraction. And not that all of the people that come for the casinos will be coming to theater, but all of those people that are coming to the casinos proves that even though it's a little bit further out of the way, it's getting a ton of traffic. It's getting a lot of people coming out there if they're interested in what's going on. And so it also provides an area that if you come for theater, then you can go to the casinos, you can go boating, you can do a bunch of other things, which is part of what made the ASC successful in Stanton. Was as a tourist destination, you could come there and get your theater fix and go to Monticello and go to the Shenandoah Valley. I mean, it's just Skyline Drive, all that stuff. So it's in fitting with the other Shakespeare festivals in North America in being the small town place that has this theater epicenter. Hartford is a different animal.
And before we hop over to Hartford, the other thing to keep in mind with Norwich is that it is in the triangle of New York, Boston, and Providence, and Hartford itself. So it's got all the beauty of the size of city that Stanton was, but also has thousands of more schools within a 4-hour radius, hundreds of more universities within a 4-hour radius. So it really expands the amount of educational work we'll be able to do, both from a ticket sale perspective and from actual educational programming. So it's, either Norwich or Hartford, which are only about 45 minutes away from each other, offer us that additional value. The Hartford opportunity is a little bit different. It's still a somewhat water view location that we're looking at, but it's just north of the very thriving downtown of inner city Hartford, where they've recently built a brand new ballpark. They're working on a really cool new AI center for the city. There's a fair amount of foot tourism already happening in that area. And there used to be a campus of RPI there downtown, which they have basically given up and sold to a developer. This developer has said to us, hey, I want to do mixed use on that property, but if you guys can show me some really cool ways to incorporate the Globe and your other theaters with some retail, with some housing, I'd love to see what that looks like. And we have architects right now who are working on that for us, with the goal of going back to this developer who seems to be the singular control of the land. We're ironing that out as we go. But if he enjoys these looks and ideas for what we're trying to build, it's a tremendous opportunity for us to move things forward there. So I want to bring all of this back around to answer James's question, though, which is, James, I think what we're doing that is awesome, and I think it's a really unique combination of who Jim and I are as partners. We're sticking strong to everything that is core to who we are. And our core values are Shakespeare's staging conditions. They are company model. They are revolutionizing the way theater is done, but we can flex everything else. You know, if it's a question of, are we going to be a 13-acre campus where people can come and hike through our theaters? That's one option. Can we also be a 2.5-acre consolidated, structure of buildings where folks can come and be on a city walk kind of situation and be part of that experience? We can flex all of that stuff because that's not the important stuff. The important stuff is building a globe in the United States, right? We know that that is key. Bringing Shakespeare staging conditions to that globe and repertory theater. Those three things in conjunction are what we are doing that is so different from what anybody else can do. And we're going to stick to our guns on those things no matter what happens. And I won't lie, we've had conversations with folks from the state where they're like, well, why are you building another theater? And what Jim says is, we're not building another theater. The world doesn't need another theater. What Connecticut, United States, and the world need is an American globe with a smart way of doing business that can stay profitable, that can make money. And, just a recent pivot, James, to let you understand where our heads have been, hello. I'm not sure who that is, but I'm glad she's on the call. What's your name? You're on mute, Paul.
Sorry, tell them your name.
Willamette.
Hello. It's so nice to have you on our call. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you. Because Willamette here, it means I've got a dash. And so I just want to sort of thank you particularly to Jim, who's the founder of this feast. I mean, actually, literally, we were all here because of Jim.
True.
I don't mean biologically. I mean that sort of like this call and so forth. So thanks for letting me be part of this.
Well, thank you for being here. It's good to have you. Bye.
I have to get my shop set up.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
She's got to make a short film. She has to get her shot set up. But that was such a cute distraction that I completely forgot where I was going. But on the pivot front, so we had been focusing on this idea of investors as part of our financial model, and we did research on this when we kicked everything off in 2020. And honestly, Jim and I were like, we have to vet this. We have to get lawyers involved to make sure that we can even use this terminology. And as it turns out, doing some deeper research, we probably shouldn't use that terminology because it's going to bounce back in a negative light against our 501c3. So we, collaborated and said, all right, so these are now, finance impact partners, which means they're going to lend us the money and they're going to get that money back and still get a small return, but we're not giving them a 10 to 15% return. So they're no longer investors. So we had to pivot with that, but we think it actually just makes the business model that much more sound and makes us feel that much more in control of where we take next steps in the business. So there will always be pivots, but we also have our true north that we sit on in the middle of what we're trying to build.
Did we get to the heart of your question, James?
I think you just put yourself on mute, James. Sorry.
I think so. I mean, it's got so many moving parts to it.
Amen.
And it's like, just when you start talking about the union and you talk about length of contract and you talk about how big is the company and you answer to diversity and, despite that being such an ugly word these days, but, but it's like, I just think that there's, I think, it's understandable that when you look at something like that, it's kind of daunting and you think, you watch theaters go under, you watch companies that used to be rep no longer being rep, you watch the ticket prices on Broadway, exclude people. And there's just so many. I mean, I love to hear the idea that let's bring in a model that's better than the model there is because, it's what's around presently seems to encourage amateurism again, and I think in the best way. And go back to the people who love it, and but then I get cynical about it. I think, does that mean you can't make a living at it? And it's always been a tough business to make a living in. I've always had another living while I was doing it. So, you know, I've never had to be a working actor who was sort of, you know, really just relying on that primarily. And I know that most actors have other gigs they do and the like. It's the nature of the beast. But you know, one of the things that attracted me about this, you know, when you were first, and I realize we're over time,
Oh, that's
so
okay.
I'll try not to go on too long. But you know, when you were first talking about this, Jim, and Tom, you know, later on, I mean, I talked to Jim about it first. I mean, that's part of the thing that excited me about it, the notion that this could be made to work, you know what I mean? And that it could refresh things. And also, you know, it's like the old ASC thing of taking what's old and renewing things, you know, by looking at, you know, what's the core of this? What's the spirit of it? How do you rejuvenate what has, you know, in many ways, I don't know, just become this kind of warped thing. It's like I feel like you know, theater's trying to compete with streaming services or something, and it's just, you know, gonna fail. You know, there's too much content being offered out there. You got to look at what you do that's different and sort of play to that, it seems to me. But I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that two other people are helming it, because when I look at it, I feel so daunted. You know.
Well, I mean, I think that's where Shakespeare staging conditions become so very important and valuable to us, James, is because it is a different experience. You can't. We've all been to an SSE. Or
well, you don't have to sell them to me, Tom.
No, I know I'm not selling it to you. I'm just saying in general, like that's where we just got to get that in front of enough people. And the beauty of magnifying our reach with touring that style again, I think is going to help that too. And, you know, you mentioned a side gig, right? And I've always had one too, actually, except when I was working for Jim. But we're building the side gig into this job, you know, and if it turns out that this job can't necessarily be equity, we haven't determined that yet. But if it turns out that that's the case, we want to offer insurance to those actors anyway. So, you know, we're going to hopefully dig into this with equity and develop a new contract that is specific to what we do. And Jim, quite honestly, that's probably something we should reach out to them about soon.
Well, yes, but FYI, and I was able to not just dip a toe, but dip a whole leg into being better than equity. Before I left the ASC, I had moved things to a 40-hour work week, 5 days a week. That trying to start making things more equitable and creating a more team-like atmosphere where people on the performance side were treated like the people inside the offices. It can be done, and can be done in a way that is actually better for work-life balance than what the union allows. The union still allows 48 hours. The union still allows 6 days a week. I wish that the 10 of 12, and there are a lot of places where what we're going to be able to do is going to take all of the protections that the union has and be better than them. I mean, the need for the union was there because people were screwed over. But I believe that the current union rules screw over actors in ways that they should not and don't have to. So I think that we're on some level, we'll get their buy-in, but, and some of you have heard me preach this before, I want performers to be able to work side by side and make the same take-home money, whether they want to be in the union or not. I don't want to have different pay scales. I want take-home pay to be the same, right, so that we really are a company. And if you want to be a part of the union, you can be. If you don't, you still can make the same amount of money. That's where the union isn't going to like us.
Agreed. But let's be careful, because we've now said diversity and equitable. If anyone mentions the I word, it's like Beetlejuice, and he's going to show up and just shut us down. So,
Laura has a question.
Laura's question, yeah.
I actually have a comment, and this is just by way of kind of, you know, assuaging some of James's fears here. And I wish Paul were still on the call, because I'm going to quote Jeffrey Rush from Shakespeare in Love. God help me, I love that movie despite all of its flaws, because when asked, you know, he says, it's all going to work out. And he's like, how will it? Shakespeare says, and he's like, I don't know. It's magic. It just will. And I think
It's a mystery. Yeah.
It's a mystery, exactly. So I think being in this business and being bold enough to take these big swings, like Jesse being brave enough to start a company in 2020, all of this stuff, you know, you need a little bit of a leap of faith. And I will say too, Tom, that I'm glad we're having this check-in today. I need to reach back out to my friends at the Connecticut Television and Film Alliance. They've been doing a ton of workshops and other things lately, so I haven't heard back from them on trying to connect you guys on the stageable piece and some other things. But one thing that they did that was really cool is offered their members of the Connecticut Film and Television Alliance health insurance. That's completely separate. Like you don't have to be a SAG-AFTRA union member to be able to buy into their like private insurance plan that they got at a really good rate. So something that, you know, down the road as this thing gets built and staffed and stuff, you and Jim might be able to look into for folks. So
thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, putting that out there.
For
Of course.
Everyone on this call, you guys have all been, you know, lifers with us, and we truly appreciate it. And I do think, Jim, says a lot about the community and the servant leadership and the company that you have created over the years, that all of us are here gathered together to continue to try to move this legacy forward. So, Jim, was there anything else we wanted to cover? I know we're a little bit over time, and, you know,
I just wanted to give Benjamin an opportunity to quickly say something about Stageable. That is also one of the reasons that we're meeting, is as a service to people who join our cause by membership into AGC at Stageable.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. I just dropped a link in the chat. So I think one of the things that for me as an entrepreneur that I'm trying to tap into is that I think there's a lot of value that's being created by a lot of companies, that there's a market that people who would really love to experience that value who can't because of reasons that are just of circumstance, right? They're not in the immediate vicinity. They may not be able to get to the event that's happening. They might be super interested to listen to a read through. They might be super interested to attend a show or a new play reading, or to hear a chat from scholars, or, you know, I think there's all kinds of things that are happening that are really valuable that just we're not connecting the two. So I was at Firehouse Theater Company yesterday. And we took that play and put it, we broadcast it, and people in New York were able to watch. New play reading, yeah. People were able to watch it in real time. And it's just an example of, I think, a myriad of ways that we can be creative and start connecting audiences and stages and creators, and maybe extending the social media shortening of our attention span to something that is a little bit longer and a little bit more interesting, and empower the work of creative people. So I think there's all kinds of ways we can do that. Stageable is all about just raising capital so that creators can create and sustaining their work, and being another place where or another stream of revenue so that we can continue to make good stuff. So, you know, one of the ways that I see doing that is by tapping into a recurring monthly subscription and saying, hey, look, you know, I can't donate $1 million, but I can give a little bit every month to help cover the costs of web domains and you know, marketing costs and all that stuff. So that's sort of the heart of the project, and Jim and Tom have been gracious enough to bear with me in the infancy of the project, but there's a lot of opportunity out there to connect with people, and I think that we can just get creative and start working on that.
If you haven't been to stageable.com, go there, and one of the really brief thumbnails that always comes to my mind is, imagine Patreon meets Bandcamp for theaters, where you can put content in there that helps make the community grow in ways that you can't necessarily do with the in-person stuff, especially when you're the AGC and you're not doing performances all the time yet. So it's a great place that we are starting out. Stageable is starting out, and hopefully we get to grow together.
Yeah, Jesse, you and I should chat. Talk about some things.
That'd be fun.
Planning an email to you as we speak. Actually, I was like, "Oh, wheels turning. Let's
Cool.
talk."
Let's
You
do
know
it.
what? That's why we have this community, right? So we can create these kind of connections and help everybody grow. Jim, any last thoughts?
Thank you all very much. If any of this stuff has you at all interested in the Mary Baldwin program, go online and check out their stuff. I think that y'all have been increasing your online presence in a way that makes it more informative and more interesting to match the interestingness of the program. I think that piece of your stuff is growing wonderfully. Please go check that out if you haven't. If you haven't checked out Paul's book, I left out. I didn't do all of the quotes that I wanted to do, but the reason to get his book is the tone. It's Paul Menzer's
And the
witty,
absolute
smart.
shameless wordplay throughout.
Yes,
It's
Yes.
very funny. It's
He
very
who would
funny.
pun would pick a pocket. Paul Menzer would pick your pocket. Let me tell you.
yeah. So thank you all very much for this. Glad to have you, and keep an eye on our socials. Help us spread our word by boosting our stuff. If it comes your way, throw it online to your folks, and we'll keep this ball rolling.
If anybody that you know has asked any questions or is interested, please let them know that we're happy to chat. And if the best way to kind of stay in touch is to join Stageable, because all of these kind of events are posted there, as well as like different PDFs of what we're sharing with governmental leaders and stuff. So there's a ton of cool information there, and it really helps us grow our network and community.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you.
Thank you,
Jessica.
everybody.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all
so
very
much.
much. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for the great chat today, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.